Today, we're going to focus on the storm scenes within the play and what is revealed about the characterisation of Lear through these scenes. By the end of the video, you should be able to analyse and explain why the storm scenes are important, explain and name several ways that storm scenes function to affect audiences' understanding of major themes, and create one or more discerning arguments about Shakespeare's use of the storm scenes, as well as other associated aesthetic features and stylistic devices. Act 3, scenes 1, 2 and 4 of King Lear are very different from those which precede and follow them. The main dramatic reason Shakespeare includes these scenes at this point in the play is in order to indicate an abrupt change. The sudden transition to the wild heath with its raging natural storm highlights a big change for the audience. Audiences see that the characters are freed from the constraints of the court setting where the emphasis was on people's relationships, as well as the necessity for performance and status inherent in that courtly setting. The change in setting also serves to reinforce the enormity of the change that Lear himself is dealing with, and acts as an allegory or conceit for the violent, unnatural disruption within the play. As we watch the play unfold, we are positioned to see that when the characters are freed from the court, they become full of raw emotion, which allows Shakespeare and the audience to focus on some abstract ideas and themes of King Lear. The storm has an important symbolic meaning. In the Jacobean era, a storm was a common metaphor for disruption and disquiet, and this can also be understood by a modern audience. In King Lear, the storm represents and symbolically mirrors the chaos in Lear's head. His emotions are as violent as the tempest raging all around him. As the gentleman says, Lear is contending with the fretful elements, bids the winds blow the earth into the sea, or swell the curled wood above the main, that things might change or cease. The description of the storm forms an effective parallel with Lear's mental turmoil. Speaking to Kent, who is trying to locate the wandering Lear, the gentleman adds to his description of the storm, saying how it tears Lear's white hair. Through this description of Lear's ageing and the futility of fighting a natural force, we cannot help but pity the old king. It is important to note that Lear is being overwhelmed by a natural force. Shakespeare is demonstrating that nature is more powerful than even the strongest of men, even those ordained by God. The gentleman goes on to describe how Lear strives in his little world of men to outstorm the to and fro conflicting wind and rain. These lines could equally be applied to humanity's attempts to control nature or Lear's personal struggle with the elements. In the description, the storm is eyeless, suggesting it, and by extension nature itself, does not care that Lear happens to be royalty, supposedly the highest category of man. Instead, audiences are positioned to see that all-consuming madness is indifferent to Lear's high station in life, through the storm itself. Certainly, one of the storm's biggest functions is to reinforce the power of nature and the necessity of abiding by the natural order. Don't forget that Shakespeare uses the stage direction of storm and tempest near the end of Act 2, when some of the characters' most unnatural, selfish and inhumane actions come to a head. In the preceding monologue, Lear curses his daughters for their cruelty and ruminates on the ways that they have emasculated him, as well as acted against familial loyalty. Audiences cannot help but see their actions as unnatural. In many versions of the play, the stage direction of Storm and Tempest is written directly after these lines. I have full cause of weeping, but this heart shall break into 100,000 flaws, or ere I'll weep, O fool, I shall go mad. Meaning that the storm itself acts not just as pathetic fallacy, but an omen. The stage direction reinforces that the storm is significant to the action of the play because it indicates that the world of the play has been turned upside down and that chaos has descended as a result of characters' ignorance of loyalty, insight and truth, amongst other things, and that natural order is inherently linked to sovereign power. The pathetic fallacy also makes it clear that Lear, by giving away his power in Britain to Goneril and Regan and eventually Edmund, has destroyed not only his own authority, but all authority. Instead of a stable hierarchical kingdom with Lear in control, chaos has overtaken the realm, and the country is at the mercy of the play's villains who care for nothing but their own power. The country is also evidently at the mercy of this storm, and the storm of Lear. So that's the big idea. Let's look specifically at some deep textual analysis. The storm and Lear's famous speech marks one of the first appearances of the apocalyptic imagery that is so important in King Lear, and that will become increasingly dominant as the play progresses. The chaos reflects the disorder in Lear's increasingly crazed mind, and the apocalyptic language represents the projection of Lear's rage and despair onto the outside world. The imagery invites us to take up the position that if his world has come to a symbolic end because his daughters have stripped away his power and betrayed him, then he seems to think the real world ought to end too. So why is the storm significant and how can we analyse it? The chaos in nature reflects the very real political chaos that has engulfed Britain in the absence of Lear's authority. With his very first words in the scene, Shakespeare vividly portrays both the mental and physical storms which are engulfing Lear. Lear cries, "Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks, rage, blow." He rants at the elements, hoping that the tempest will obliterate the world, destroying ingrateful man. He rages as the storm does, becoming wilder and wilder. The storm is clearly designed as a mirror to Lear's mental state. In his rallying cry against nature, the storm, his children and the gods, we see that Lear is preoccupied with his daughter's betrayal, calling them pernicious, and cries, "Oh, 'tis foul." The amount of exclamation marks contained in Lear's 3 speeches at the start of Act 3, Scene 2 demonstrates how agitated he has become. His speech is broken and littered with punctuation. These speeches establish and reflect the properties of the storm. They are full of anger and distress as the Mad King moves swiftly from one topic to another. Shakespeare employs violent images in Lear's speech as he talks of high engendered battles and crimes unwhipped of justice. Lear also fails to interact with 2 of his most loyal companions, Kent and the Fool, and this represents just how isolated Lear has become in his insanity. For audiences, the characterisation suggests several things that we could include as concepts for a paragraph or a wider essay. Shakespeare is presenting the perspective that sovereign authority relies on the king and the royal family following the natural order, that a loss of rational powers can have some merit in it despite the pathetic condition to which it renders people, that achieving justice is not a simple task, that the natural order, once disturbed, is impossible to restore, amongst many other points. Along with Lear's increasing despair and projection, we also see his fixation on his daughters when he says, "Nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax you not, you elements, with unkindness." Lear tells the thunder that he does not blame it for attacking him because it does not owe him anything, but he does blame his 2 pernicious daughters for their betrayal. The identification of his daughter's unnatural and cruel acts indicates to audiences that he is still able to locate the source of his misfortune. So he's not entirely mad yet. He does start to realise that he is going mad, a terrifying realisation for anyone, but an especially terrifying realisation for a king. Despite the growing storm and Lear's clearly growing madness, Lear suddenly notices his fool and asks him, "How dost, my boy, art cold?" He adds, "I have one part in my heart that's sorry yet for thee." Here we see that Lear takes selfless notice of another human being for the first time in the play. This moment of concern reflects the growth of Lear's humility, which eventually redeems him and enables him to win Cordelia's forgiveness, and foreshadows his redemption at their very end. So one significant element of the storm scene is its use as a device to emphasise the disruption to the natural order and to warn against chaos. But that isn't its only function. So if we're going to take away 2 points about this, what are they? The storm scene's allegorical significance warns against moral blindness by highlighting the need to maintain and restore natural order. The storm scene also functions as a mirror of Lear's madness by showing his punishment for his faults to warn against acting in immoral, selfish, and ignoble ways. So now we've reviewed, spend some time on these final statements. Could these be theses for an essay? What would the question look like? Does this fit into our established patterns? Where's the analysis here, and what aesthetic features, stylistic devices, and audience positioning did you hear about? How could you write an essay that communicated these?